Marcus Chen had seen many strange things during his 15 years as a deep space salvage operator, but nothing quite like this. The distress beacon had led him to the edge of the Veil Nebula, where ancient radiation storms turned most electronic equipment into expensive paperweights. His ship, the Persistence, was one of the few vessels tough enough to navigate these treacherous waters. The source of the signal floated before him like a metallic island in space. The alien vessel was massive, easily 3 times the size of his own ship, with flowing curves that seemed to ripple even in the vacuum of space. Its hull bore scorch marks and gaping holes that spoke of a desperate battle. Whatever had attacked this ship had brought serious firepower. Marcus guided his ship closer, scanning for life signs. The readings came back negative, but something else caught his attention. Deep within the alien vessel, his sensors detected an energy signature unlike anything in human databases. It pulsed with a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. "Well, old girl," he said to his ship's AI. "Looks like we found ourselves a mystery." The docking procedure took 3 hours. The alien ship's systems were completely foreign, responding to none of the standard override codes that worked on most known species technology. Marcus had to cut through the hull using plasma torches, creating his own entry point. The moment he stepped inside, he knew this was no ordinary salvage operation. The corridors were built for beings much larger than humans. The ceiling arched high above his head, decorated with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows that danced along the walls. The air was breathable, though it carried a strange metallic taste that made his nose tingle. Marcus followed his scanner toward the energy source, moving deeper into the ship. The passages branched and twisted like the inside of a seashell. He passed rooms filled with equipment he couldn't begin to understand. Crystalline formations grew from the walls, pulsing with soft light. Some chambers contained what looked like art, sculptures that defied physics, hanging in the air without visible support. The deeper he went, the stronger the energy readings became. His scanner began picking up thermal signatures as well. Something was generating heat in the ship's core. Marcus checked his sidearm and continued forward, every instinct telling him he was approaching something significant. The central chamber took his breath away. It was a vast spherical room with walkways spiraling around its circumference. At the center, suspended in a web of energy beams, hung a crystalline structure the size of a small building. It was translucent like ice, but warm light pulsed through it in waves. The energy readings were off the charts. As Marcus moved closer, he realized the crystal wasn't solid. Something moved inside it. The shape was serpentine, coiled like a sleeping snake. Scales caught the light, throwing rainbows across the chamber walls. This wasn't a storage device or a power source. It was an egg. The creature inside was enormous, even in its unhatched state. Its head alone was larger than Marcus himself. Delicate fins ran along its spine, and what looked like wings were folded against its sides. Despite its size, there was something graceful about it, almost beautiful. Marcus had heard stories about the dragons. Every spacer had. They were legends from the early days of galactic exploration, when the first human ships pushed beyond the solar system. Ancient beings of immense power and intelligence, capable of traveling between stars without ships. Most people dismissed them as myths, stories told in spaceport bars after too many drinks. But here was proof. The egg pulsed with life, the creature inside stirring occasionally as if responding to his presence. Marcus realized he was looking at something beyond price, not just because of its rarity, but because of what it represented. The dragons were said to be the galaxy's memory keepers, repositories of knowledge spanning millions of years. His scanner chimed with an urgent warning. The ship's power systems were failing. The energy beams supporting the egg flickered and dimmed. Without them, the crystalline shell would crack and the creature inside would die. Marcus had maybe an hour before complete system failure. He could salvage what he could carry and leave. The smart thing would be to grab some of the smaller artifacts and get out before the ship became a tomb. But looking at the egg, watching the young dragon move restlessly inside its crystal prison, Marcus knew he couldn't walk away. The ship's computer core was 3 levels down from the central chamber. Marcus ran through corridors that groaned with structural stress. Emergency bulkheads were sealing themselves, trying to contain atmosphere leaks. He reached the computer core just as another section of the ship lost power. The alien systems were completely foreign, but energy was energy. Marcus began rerouting power from his own ship through temporary cables. It was dangerous. If something went wrong, both vessels could lose power. But the alternative was letting the dragon die. The work took 40 minutes. By the time he finished, sweat soaked his clothing despite the ship's cooling systems. The power transfer held, but barely. The alien ship was dying around him, and his jury-rigged solution was only buying time. Back in the central chamber, the energy beams had stabilized. The egg's glow returned to its steady rhythm. Marcus sat on one of the walkways, catching his breath and trying to figure out his next move. The dragon egg was too large to move, and even if he could, he had no idea how to keep it alive outside this chamber. That's when he noticed the scorch marks on the chamber walls. They weren't random damage from the battle outside. The patterns were too precise, too deliberate. Someone had used energy weapons inside this room, specifically targeting the support systems. This hadn't been a random attack. Someone had tried to kill the unhatched dragon. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's failing life support. He was holding the last dragon egg in the galaxy, and someone had gone to great lengths to destroy it. The question was why and whether they would come back to finish the job. His comm system crackled to life. 3 ships were approaching fast, their signatures unknown but their intent clear from their weapons hot status. Marcus had minutes to decide what to do: run and save himself, or stay and protect something that might be the key to understanding the galaxy's greatest mysteries. Looking at the egg, watching the dragon stir inside its crystal shell, Marcus made his choice. He wasn't running. Not this time. The 3 ships came in fast and silent, their hulls black as the void between stars. Marcus recognized the design. Syndicate hunters, the kind of mercenaries who asked no questions and left no witnesses. Whoever wanted the dragon dead had serious resources, and even more serious determination. Marcus sealed himself into the central chamber and activated every defensive system the alien ship had left. Ancient weapons came online, their targeting systems struggling to lock onto the approaching vessels. The dragon ship had been built for war, but its wounds ran deep. Half the weapon arrays were offline and the others flickered uncertainly. The first barrage lit up space around them. The hunters fired with surgical precision, targeting the alien ship's remaining power nodes. They weren't trying to destroy the vessel outright. They wanted to get inside and finish what someone had started. Marcus found himself thinking about his daughter Sarah, safe on Earth with her mother. He'd missed her 10th birthday for this salvage run, promising to bring her something special from the outer systems. Now he might never see her again, and for what? A creature that existed only in legends? But watching the egg pulse with life, feeling the ancient ship shudder around him, Marcus knew he couldn't leave. This wasn't just about the dragon anymore. It was about standing up to the kind of people who would murder something innocent before it even had a chance to breathe. The alien weapons finally found their mark. Energy beams lanced out, striking the lead hunter ship. Its shields flared and held, but the vessel rolled away, clearly damaged. The other 2 ships spread out, trying to flank the dying dragon ship. Marcus activated his suit's comm system and opened a channel to the hunters. "This is Marcus Chen aboard the salvage vessel Persistence. You're attacking a lawful salvage operation in international space. Back off, or I'll be forced to defend myself." The response came back cold and emotionless. "Mr. Chen, you are interfering with a containment operation. Withdraw immediately, or you will be destroyed along with the target." "Containment operation?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You mean murder? That's a living creature in there. That creature represents a threat to galactic stability. Its existence cannot be permitted." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. These weren't random pirates or black market collectors. They were operating under official sanction from someone with serious authority. The dragon wasn't just rare. It was dangerous enough that powerful people wanted it dead. Another barrage struck the ship, this time targeting the chamber housing the egg. The energy beams supporting the crystal shell flickered and dimmed. The dragon inside stirred restlessly, as if sensing the approaching danger. Marcus made a desperate decision. He activated his ship's emergency beacon, broadcasting on all frequencies. If he was going to die here, he'd make sure the galaxy knew why. The message was simple: coordinates, video footage of the egg, and a record of the conversation with the hunters. "You just made a mistake." The hunter commander's voice crackled over the comm. "That signal will bring nothing but death to anyone who responds." 2 more hunter ships dropped out of hyperspace, these ones larger and better armed. Marcus felt his stomach drop. 5 ships against a dying alien vessel and his small salvage craft. The odds had just become impossible. But something unexpected happened. The dragon egg began to glow brighter, its pulse quickening. The energy readings spiked beyond anything Marcus had seen. The creature inside was responding to the danger, even in its unhatched state. The ship's systems came alive around him. Weapon arrays that had been offline for centuries suddenly blazed with power. The navigation system started plotting attack vectors with impossible speed and precision. The dragon ship remembered how to fight. Marcus found himself at the center of a battle unlike anything in human experience. The alien weapons fired with devastating accuracy, each shot precisely calculated to cause maximum damage. The hunters' formation broke apart as they struggled to respond to attacks that seemed to anticipate their every move. But there were too many of them, and they had reinforcements coming. Marcus watched his scanner as more ships appeared at the edge of the system. A dozen vessels, then 20, all converging on their position. Someone really wanted this dragon dead. The egg's glow reached blinding intensity. The dragon inside was moving constantly now, pressing against the crystal shell. Hairline cracks appeared in the surface, spreading like a spider web. The creature was trying to hatch, responding to the crisis around it. Marcus realized with growing horror that the hunters might get what they wanted after all. If the shell cracked now, in the vacuum of space, the dragon would die anyway. All their efforts would be for nothing. He began working frantically at the chamber's environmental controls, trying to establish an atmosphere that might support the creature if it hatched. The alien systems were complex beyond anything he'd encountered, but desperation made him innovative. He rerouted life support from his own ship, creating a pocket of breathable air around the egg. A massive explosion rocked the chamber as one of the hunter ships broke through the outer defenses. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red. The dragon ship was dying around them, its ancient systems finally succumbing to damage and age. But the dragon wasn't giving up. The cracks in the shell spread faster, and Marcus could see the creature's eye through one of the larger gaps. It was enormous, larger than his head, and it looked directly at him with an intelligence that took his breath away. The hunters were boarding the ship now. Marcus could hear the cutting torches working through the outer hull. He had minutes, maybe less, before they reached the central chamber. His sidearm wouldn't stop professional killers, and the ship's defenses were focused on the external battle. The dragon's eye blinked slowly, and Marcus felt something brush against his mind. Not thoughts exactly, but emotions. Gratitude, determination. And something else, a sense of vast knowledge of secrets that spanned the galaxy's history. "I know," Marcus whispered to the egg. "I know you're important. That's why I'm here." The shell cracked wide open, and the dragon's head emerged into the makeshift atmosphere Marcus had created. It was beautiful and terrible, covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water. The creature's eyes held depths that seemed to contain stars. The first hunter rounded the corner into the central chamber, weapon raised. Marcus stepped between the soldier and the hatching dragon, spreading his arms wide despite knowing his gesture was futile. "You'll have to go through me," he said. The hunter raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the dragon spoke, not with words but with a voice that resonated in every mind within 1,000 kilometers. The sound carried power that made reality itself seem fragile. The hunter's weapon fell from nerveless fingers. His companions, still in the corridor, cried out in shock and confusion. Across the system, the approaching fleet hesitated as their crews struggled to understand what they were experiencing. The dragon was free, and everything was about to change. The dragon's voice echoed through dimensions Marcus didn't know existed. It wasn't sound in any conventional sense, but something deeper. A vibration that touched the quantum foundation of reality itself. Every living being within light years felt it, a presence awakening after eons of slumber. The young dragon pulled itself free from the crystal shell, its movements graceful despite its size. It was magnificent, 30 meters from nose to tail with wings that shimmered like aurora. Its scales shifted through the entire spectrum, settling into deep blues and purples that seemed to contain their own light. When it looked at Marcus, he felt as though he was being examined by the universe itself. The hunter who had entered the chamber stood frozen, his weapon forgotten. His face showed the same expression Marcus had seen on deep space pilots who'd stared too long into the void, a mixture of awe and terror that came from encountering something far beyond human understanding. The dragon's mental voice touched Marcus's consciousness, and this time he could understand it clearly. The thoughts came with images and emotions that painted a picture more complete than words ever could. You stood between death and the future. Why? Marcus found himself answering without speaking aloud. His thoughts somehow carried on the same channel. Because it was the right thing to do. Because you're alive and that matters. Your species is young. Most would have fled or sought profit. You chose sacrifice without understanding what you protected. I understood enough. You're the last one, aren't you? The dragon's great head inclined slightly. The last of my clutch. Perhaps the last of my kind. We were removed from the galaxy's equation long ago. Images flooded Marcus's mind. Ancient conflicts that spanned millennia. Dragons serving as mediators between species. Guardians of knowledge and keepers of peace. And then betrayal. Systematic extermination, eggs destroyed before they could hatch. The galaxy's memory being deliberately erased. Who did this to you? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he knew the answer. Those who believed the galaxy would be easier to control without witnesses to its true history. Those who profited from ignorance and conflict. The hunter ships outside had gone silent, their crews struggling to process what they were experiencing. But Marcus knew the effect wouldn't last long. Shock would give way to renewed determination, especially if these people had been hunting dragons for generations. The dragon seemed to read his thoughts. You are correct. They will recover, and they will try again. This one, it gestured toward the frozen hunter, carries orders that speak of desperation. My emergence was not unexpected. Marcus looked at the paralyzed soldier, seeing him clearly for the first time. The man's armor bore symbols that made Marcus's blood run cold, the same insignia worn by Galactic Council peacekeepers. This wasn't a rogue operation. The highest levels of galactic government wanted the dragon dead. Why? Marcus asked. What are they so afraid of? Truth. Justice. The memory of what they destroyed to build their empire of mediocrity. The dragon moved with surprising grace for something so large, flowing through the chamber like liquid mercury. It touched the walls with delicate claws and the ship's systems responded instantly. Power flowed through circuits that had been dead for centuries. The vessel began to heal itself, hull plates sealing and atmosphere returning to areas that had been vacuumed for eons. This ship has been my nursery for 3,000 years. My mother hid me here before she died, along with the accumulated knowledge of our species. Everything your galaxy forgot is stored in these crystals. Marcus looked around the chamber with new eyes, seeing the crystalline formations for what they really were. A vast library containing millions of years of galactic history. Knowledge that someone had tried very hard to erase. They're not going to stop, Marcus said. Even if we fight off these ships, they'll send more. The entire Galactic Council is behind this. Yes. But they made an error. They allowed me to mature enough to awaken fully. I am no longer defenseless. The dragon's eyes began to glow and Marcus felt power building around them. The ship's weapon systems came online, but these weren't the limited arrays that had fought earlier. New configurations emerged from the hull, weapons based on principles that human science couldn't even comprehend. Your ship is small but well built. Can it carry you to safety while I deal with these hunters? Marcus thought of his daughter, of the life waiting for him back on Earth. Then he looked at the dragon, at the last representative of a species that had been murdered by the very institutions humanity trusted to keep the peace. I'm not leaving, he said. If the council wants you dead, there has to be a reason. And if they're willing to send assassins, they're not going to stop with you. Your species may face consequences for your choice. My species deserves to know the truth. All of us do. The dragon studied him for a long moment, and Marcus felt layers of assessment happening beyond his perception. Finally, the great creature nodded. Very well. Then we fight together. But first you must understand what we face. The dragon touched Marcus's forehead with one delicate claw, and suddenly he was elsewhere, standing in a vast council chamber filled with beings from across the galaxy. But this wasn't the Galactic Council he knew. These representatives were different species entirely, older and wiser looking than the current galactic leadership. This was the galaxy before the Purge, the dragon's voice explained as the vision unfolded. A true federation where knowledge was shared and conflicts were resolved through wisdom rather than force. Dragons served as living libraries and mediators, ensuring that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. Marcus watched in horror as the scene changed. Warships bearing familiar insignia attacked peaceful worlds. Ancient beings were hunted down and killed. Libraries were burned, monuments destroyed, entire species relocated or eliminated. The dragons fought back, but they were few and their enemies were many. The current Galactic Council rose from the ashes of that war. They built their power on ignorance, convincing younger species that the old ways were primitive and dangerous. We became myths, legends, cautionary tales about the dangers of unchecked power. But why? Marcus asked as the vision faded. Why destroy all that knowledge and wisdom? Because wisdom makes beings harder to control. Knowledge leads to questions. The Council prefers subjects who accept their authority without understanding the alternatives. Marcus was back in the chamber, the dragon's claw withdrawing from his forehead. The hunter still stood frozen, but Marcus could see awareness returning to his eyes. Outside, the attacking fleet was beginning to move again. Now you understand what you have chosen to protect. Not just my life, but the possibility of truth returning to the galaxy. Marcus nodded grimly. Then let's give them a fight they'll remember. The dragon smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both terrifying and reassuring. Indeed, it has been far too long since a dragon went to war, power built around them as ancient weapon systems came online. Marcus felt the ship respond to the dragon's will, becoming something far more than the sum of its parts. They were about to take on the most powerful military force in the galaxy. But for the first time since the hunters had arrived, Marcus felt like they might actually have a chance. The dragon ship transformed around them like a creature awakening from deep sleep. Hull plates shifted into new configurations, revealing weapon systems that defied human understanding. Energy conduits that had been dark for millennia blazed with power that made the air itself shimmer. Marcus felt the ship's consciousness stirring, ancient artificial minds coming online to serve their awakened master. The frozen hunter finally broke free of the dragon's influence, stumbling backward with terror written across his face. He reached for his weapon, but the dragon's gaze stopped him cold. "Tell your masters what you have seen." The dragon spoke directly into the man's mind. "Tell them that the last of the archive keepers has awakened. Tell them their time of lies is ending." The hunter fled, running through corridors that rearranged themselves to speed his escape. Within minutes, he was back aboard his ship, broadcasting emergency signals to the fleet. Marcus watched through the ship's sensors as panic spread through the attacking force. "They're calling for reinforcements," Marcus reported, monitoring the communications traffic. "Something called a cleansing fleet, as expected. The Council has maintained such forces for 3,000 years, waiting for this day. Ships designed specifically to kill dragons. The first wave of attacks came from long range, missiles that bent space around themselves, making them nearly impossible to intercept. But the dragon ship's defenses were equally impossible. Energy barriers appeared that turned the missiles into harmless light, while return fire lanced out with precision that human targeting systems couldn't match. Marcus found himself swept up in the battle, his consciousness somehow linked to the ship's targeting arrays. He could feel the dragon's presence beside him, vast and ancient, directing their defense with tactical genius accumulated over millennia. Together they were something greater than either could be alone. The hunter fleet began to break apart under their assault. Ships that had seemed invincible minutes before now fled in disorder, their crews overwhelmed by weapons that operated on principles they didn't understand. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. "How many ships do they have?" he asked as they destroyed another hunter vessel. "More than enough. The Council has spent 3,000 years preparing for this moment. They have fleets hidden throughout the galaxy, crews trained from birth to hunt my kind. But they have also grown complacent. They expected to face a creature weakened by isolation, not one empowered by righteous human determination." Marcus felt a surge of pride at the dragon's words, but also growing concern. What happens when word of this gets out? When other species learn that dragons still exist? That depends on you and your kind. Humans are young but not yet corrupted by the Council's lies. You may be the galaxy's best hope for learning the truth. The battle around them intensified as more ships arrived. These weren't the Black Hunter vessels but official Council warships, their hulls bearing the insignia of galactic peacekeeping forces. Marcus felt sick as he realized the scope of the conspiracy. The very institutions that claimed to protect the galaxy, were the ones perpetuating the greatest lie in its history. But something was happening beyond the immediate battle. The Dragon's emergency beacon, combined with Marcus's own distress signal, had reached sympathetic ears. Ships were arriving from across the sector. Independent traders, exploration vessels, even some smaller government ships whose crews had questions about their orders. "We've got company," Marcus announced as his sensors detected the new arrivals. "But I'm not sure whose side they're on. Truth has its own gravity. Those who seek it will be drawn here, regardless of the danger." The newcomers spread out around the battle zone, maintaining careful distance from both sides. Marcus could hear their communications traffic. Confusion, awe, and growing anger as they began to understand what they were witnessing. Video of the Dragon was spreading through their networks, along with Marcus's recorded confrontation with the hunters. Captain Sarah Martinez of the independent trader Phoenix was the first to break the silence. "This is Captain Martinez to all vessels. I don't know what's happening here, but I've seen the footage. That's a living being they're trying to murder, and that's not right by any standard I know." Other voices joined in, ship captains and crew members expressing similar outrage. The tide of public opinion was shifting, but the council forces weren't backing down. If anything, they seemed more determined to complete their mission before the situation spiraled completely out of control. Admiral Voss, commanding the council fleet, opened a general broadcast. "This is Admiral Voss of the Galactic Council Defense Force. The creature you see is an existential threat to galactic stability. It possesses dangerous knowledge that could destabilize our entire civilization. For the safety of all species, it must be destroyed." The Dragon's mental laughter echoed through Marcus's consciousness. The same lies they have told for 3,000 years. They claim stability while perpetuating ignorance. They speak of safety while hunting the innocent. Marcus opened his own channel to the gathering fleet. "This is Marcus Chen, human salvage operator. I've been inside that ship. I've seen what they're trying to destroy. It's not a weapon or a threat, it's a library. They're trying to burn the galaxy's memory." "Chen, stand down immediately," Admiral Voss commanded. "You are interfering with a lawful operation." "Lawful according to who?" Marcus shot back. "Since when is murder lawful? Since when is burning knowledge justified?" The Dragon touched his mind again, and suddenly Marcus understood something that changed everything. The knowledge stored in the ship's crystal matrices wasn't just historical records. It contained the locations of other hidden caches, other secret libraries scattered across the galaxy. If this dragon died, all of that accumulated wisdom would be lost forever. But if it survived, if it could reach those hidden repositories, the truth could be restored to the galaxy. "You understand," the Dragon observed. "This is not just about my survival. This is about the future of knowledge itself." "Then we make sure you survive," Marcus said grimly. More council ships were arriving by the hour, but so were independents drawn by the spreading news. The battle was becoming something larger than a simple hunt. It was becoming a war between those who wanted truth and those who profited from lies. The Dragon began to sing, not with its voice, but with harmonics that resonated through subspace itself. The song carried images and memories, broadcasting the truth directly into the minds of everyone within range. Marcus saw through the Dragon's ancestral memories, the galaxy as it once was, rich with diversity and wisdom, before the Council's purge reduced it to controlled mediocrity. The effect on the gathering fleets was immediate and dramatic. Some Council ships began to turn away, their crews no longer willing to fight for a cause they now understood was built on lies. Others became more aggressive, their commanders desperate to silence the truth before it spread further. "All vessels, this is Admiral Voss," came the increasingly desperate broadcast. "The creature is using psychic manipulation. Do not listen to its propaganda. Destroy it before it corrupts more minds," but it was too late. The truth was spreading at light speed through subspace communications, carried by ships fleeing the battle zone. Across the galaxy, beings were learning about the dragons for the first time in 3,000 years. They were discovering that their history had been stolen from them. Marcus felt the weight of what they had started. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a revolution, and they were at its center. "Are you ready for this?" he asked the Dragon as more council reinforcements arrived. "Once this starts, there's no going back." "There was never any going back," the Dragon replied. "From the moment you chose to stand between death and the future, this outcome was inevitable." Now we see if your species is truly ready to claim its destiny among the stars. The revolution spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within hours of the dragon's awakening, the news had reached every inhabited system in the galaxy. Subspace networks carried video footage of the creature emerging from its crystal shell, along with fragments of the ancient memories it had shared. Beings who had never questioned the Council's version of history suddenly found themselves face to face with evidence of a vast deception. Marcus watched from the Dragon, ship's command center, as the galaxy convulsed around them. Protests erupted on 100 worlds as people demanded answers from their governments. Independent research teams began investigating archaeological sites that had been declared off-limits for centuries. Most shocking of all, some council member species began to break ranks, their representatives calling for full disclosure of historical records. "It's working," Marcus breathed, watching the reports flood in through commandeered communication arrays. "They can't contain this." "Truth has its own momentum," the dragon agreed, its massive form coiled around the central chamber's support pillars. "Once released, it spreads like fire through dry grass. But fire can be deadly to those who started it." Indeed, the Council's response was swift and brutal. Emergency martial law was declared across core worlds. Communication networks were seized or shut down. Ships carrying dragon-related information were intercepted and their crews detained. But for every message they stopped, 10 more got through. The truth had too much momentum to halt. Admiral Voss's fleet had grown to over 200 ships, a force large enough to sterilize entire worlds. But they were no longer fighting just Marcus and the dragon. Independent vessels had formed a defensive perimeter around the ancient ship, their crews determined to protect what might be the galaxy's last chance to reclaim its stolen heritage. The battle had become a siege, with both sides afraid to make the first decisive move. The Council forces could overwhelm the defenders, but only at the cost of destroying the very knowledge they wanted to suppress. The Independents couldn't match the military ships and firepower, but their mere presence made any attack a public relations disaster for the Council. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the deep space research vessel Galileo," came a transmission from the perimeter. "We've got incoming ships on the edge of the system. Configuration unknown, but they're big." Marcus felt his stomach drop as new contacts appeared on the sensors. These weren't Council warships or independent traders. They were massive vessels of completely alien design, their hulls covered in the same flowing patterns he'd seen on the Dragon ship. "My people," the Dragon said softly, its mental voice carrying a mixture of joy and sorrow. "The few who survived the purge. They felt my awakening across the void." 3 dragon ships materialized from hyperspace, each one larger than any vessel in either fleet. They moved with the same liquid grace as their living passengers, their hulls shifting color like aurora. These were ships that had been hiding at the galaxy's edge for 3,000 years, waiting for a sign that it was safe to return. The effect on both fleets was immediate. The independent ships cheered, seeing their cause vindicated by the arrival of the legendary beings themselves. The Council forces fell silent, their crews finally understanding the magnitude of what they faced. "All vessels, stand down immediately," Admiral Voss broadcast, his voice strained with barely controlled panic. "You are harboring enemies of galactic stability. Withdraw, or you will be fired upon." The lead dragon ship's response came not as a transmission, but as a presence that touched every mind in the system. It was an adult dragon, ancient beyond human comprehension, its mental voice carrying the weight of eons. "I am Azrael, speaker for the remnant. We return to claim what was stolen from us, not territory or power, but truth itself. Stand aside, children of ignorance, or face the consequences of your ancestors' crimes." Marcus felt the young dragon beside him stirring with excitement and recognition. "My grandmother lives. I thought all the elders had perished." The arrival of the elder dragons changed everything. Council ships began defecting openly, their crews unwilling to fire on beings that existed in their oldest legends. Some vessels simply powered down their weapons and waited. Others turned and fled, carrying word of the dragon's return to the farthest corners of the galaxy. But Admiral Voss and his core loyalists weren't giving up. "All remaining vessels, this is Admiral Voss. The contamination has spread too far. Initiate Protocol 7. Marcus had never heard of Protocol 7, but the dragon's reaction told him everything he needed to know. The young creature recoiled in horror, its scales shifting to deep reds and blacks. Stellar ignition weapons. They mean to destroy this entire system to prevent our message from spreading. Can they do that? Marcus asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. The Council has prepared for this day. They would rather see systems burn than lose their grip on power. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Protocol 7 wasn't just about stopping the dragons, it was about making an example. Any system that harbored the truth would be destroyed utterly, leaving nothing but radiation and debris as a warning to others. But the Elder Dragons weren't defenseless. As the Council ships began deploying their doomsday weapons, the ancient vessels responded with technologies that made human engineering look like children's toys. Space itself seemed to bend around them, creating shields that existed in dimensions Marcus couldn't even perceive. The battle that followed lasted less than an hour, but it redefined what warfare meant in the modern galaxy. The Council's weapons, designed to crack planets, were turned aside like raindrops. Dragon ships moved through space like living things, their hulls flowing around incoming fire before striking back with precision that bordered on precognition. Marcus watched in awe as Admiral Voss's flagship, the mighty dreadnought Supremacy, was systematically dismantled by weapons that seemed to edit its existence rather than simply destroy it. Armor plating simply ceased to exist, revealing the superstructure beneath. Critical systems failed not from damage but from having their fundamental properties altered. But the dragons weren't trying to kill. Marcus realized with growing amazement that despite facing weapons of mass destruction, the ancient beings were carefully avoiding casualties. Council crews found themselves transported to escape pods before their ships were disabled. Life support systems were left intact even as everything else failed. "We are not what they made us out to be," the young dragon explained as Marcus voiced his confusion. "We do not kill unless there is no alternative. Even these deceived fools deserve the chance to learn truth." The tide of battle turned completely when smaller Council vessels began surrendering en masse. Their crews, faced with the reality of dragons who showed mercy, rather than the monsters from propaganda, chose to lay down their arms rather than continue fighting for a lie. Admiral Voss made one last desperate transmission before his flagship went dead. "This isn't over. The Council has resources you can't imagine. Fleets, weapons, allies across the galaxy. You've won a battle, but the war will destroy everything." Perhaps Azrael's mental voice replied across all frequencies. "But now the galaxy knows the truth exists. That knowledge cannot be unlearned." As the immediate crisis ended, Marcus found himself face to face with a new reality. The galaxy would never be the same. The comfortable lies that had maintained order for 3 millennia were crumbling, and no one knew what would replace them. Independent ships were already leaving the system, carrying word of what they had witnessed to every corner of known space. Some would be intercepted by Council forces, but many would get through. The revolution was spreading beyond anyone's ability to control. The young dragon moved closer to Marcus, its great head lowering until they were eye to eye. "You have given us a gift beyond measure, Marcus Chen. Not just my life, but the chance to restore what was lost. How can such a debt ever be repaid?" Marcus thought of his daughter, of the galaxy she would inherit. A galaxy where truth was returning after 3,000 years of carefully managed ignorance, where beings might once again have access to the full scope of their heritage. "Just promise me one thing," he said finally. "When this is all over, when the truth comes out, make sure people remember how it started. Not with grand gestures or ancient magic, but with someone choosing to do the right thing when it mattered." The dragon's eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. "The galaxy will remember, Marcus Chen. And so will we." Outside, the elder dragons were already beginning their work. Ancient knowledge flowed from their ships to the hidden archives scattered across the galaxy, awakening repositories of wisdom that had slept for millennia. The truth was spreading like wildfire, carried by beings who had waited 3,000 years for this moment. The war for the galaxy's soul had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 months after the awakening, the galaxy was burning. Not with the clean fire of stellar ignition weapons, but with the messy, chaotic flames of revolution. On 17 worlds, governments had fallen as populations learned the true scope of the lies they had been fed. On 43 others, civil wars raged between those who embraced the returning knowledge and those who clung to the Council's version of reality. Marcus stood in the observation deck of New Archive, the mobile research station the Dragons had constructed from salvaged council ships and ancient technology. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see the ruins of what had once been the Council's primary data storage facility on Kepler 442b. The Dragons had stripped it clean of historical records, revealing 3 millennia of carefully edited and fabricated information. "Any word from Earth?" asked Dr. Elena Vasquez, the former research captain who had become one of the revolution's key coordinators. Her hair had gone prematurely gray in the months since the awakening, aged by the stress of trying to hold together an alliance of species that had never fully trusted each other. Marcus shook his head. "Still under council lockdown. They've classified the entire Sol system as a quarantine zone. Anyone trying to enter gets turned away by military patrols. It was the price of his choice, and it ate at him daily." His decision to protect the Dragon had made Earth a target. The Council couldn't risk humanity spreading the truth to other species, so they had isolated the entire system. Sarah was trapped on a world that might never see the outside galaxy again. The young Dragon, who had taken the name Keeper as a reflection of its role as guardian of restored knowledge, sensed his distress. "Your sacrifice weighs heavily on you." "It's not my sacrifice I'm worried about," Marcus replied. "It's theirs. My daughter didn't choose this fight, but she's paying the price for it anyway. All change demands sacrifice. The question is whether the cost is justified by the outcome." Through the station's communication arrays, reports continued to flood in from across the galaxy. The picture they painted was complex and troubling. Yes, the truth was spreading. Ancient repositories were being opened, forgotten technologies rediscovered, lost art and literature brought back to light. But the process was destroying the carefully maintained stability that had kept the galaxy relatively peaceful for centuries. Trade routes were disrupted as species reassessed their relationships with former allies. Scientific cooperation broke down as researchers questioned everything they thought they knew. Most seriously, the careful balance of power that had prevented large-scale wars was crumbling as member species reevaluated their place in the galactic order. Admiral Chen Wu of the Earth Defense Force, Marcus's uncle and one of the few family members able to communicate with him through diplomatic channels, had been blunt in his assessment. "You've started something that might destroy civilization as we know it. I hope you're prepared to live with the consequences." But there were positive developments too. Species that had been marginalized by the Council's human-centric policies were finding their voices again. Archaeological teams were uncovering evidence of ancient civilizations that had been written out of official history. Most importantly, young people across the galaxy were embracing the expanded knowledge with enthusiasm that gave Marcus hope for the future. The biggest breakthrough had come when the Dragons located the Central Archive, a massive repository hidden in the galactic core that contained the complete historical record of pre-purge civilization. The knowledge it contained was staggering. Scientific principles that could revolutionize technology, philosophical frameworks that offered alternatives to the Council's rigid hierarchies, and evidence of peaceful coexistence between species that had been taught to see each other as natural enemies. But accessing that knowledge came at a cost. The Central Archive was protected by Council forces that made Admiral Voss's fleet look like a patrol squadron. Hundreds of ships, including experimental vessels armed with weapons that bent the laws of physics, surrounded the ancient station. Getting past them would require resources and allies that the Revolution didn't yet possess. That was why Marcus found himself preparing for what might be a suicide mission. The Dragons had developed a plan to reach the Central Archive, but it required a human pilot willing to take incredible risks. Someone who could navigate through Council defenses using techniques that relied more on intuition than technology. "You don't have to do this," Keeper said as Marcus reviewed the mission parameters for the 100th time. "We can find another way, can you?" Marcus asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like our only real chance to get the complete truth out there. Without the Central Archive, we're fighting with incomplete information against people who know exactly what they're hiding. Your species continues to surprise us. Most would choose safety over principle when the stakes become this high." Marcus thought about that as he made his final preparations. Maybe Keeper was right about humans. Maybe they were different from the other species the Dragons had known. But he suspected it was simpler than that. When you truly understood what was at stake, not just your own life, but the future of knowledge itself, The choice became clear. The mission plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would pilot a modified Council stealth ship into the core systems, disguised as a routine supply run. Once past the outer defenses, he would create a distraction, while Keeper and 2 other dragons attempted to breach the Archive's protective barriers. If everything went perfectly, they would have perhaps 10 minutes to download the complete historical database before the Council forces overwhelmed them. If anything went wrong, they would all die, and the truth would remain buried for another 3,000 years. "There's something else," Dr. Vasquez said as Marcus prepared to board his ship. "We've been monitoring Council communications. They're planning something called Operation Tabula Rasa." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "What kind of operation?" "We're not sure, but the name suggests they're planning to wipe the slate clean. Start over completely." The intelligence suggests they're willing to sacrifice entire systems to stop the truth from spreading. The implications were staggering. The Council was prepared to commit genocide on a galactic scale, rather than lose their grip on power. How many billions would die to preserve a lie? As Marcus's ship launched from New Archive, he carried with him the weight of those potential deaths. If he failed, if the Central Archive remained sealed, the Council might succeed in their plan to erase not just the truth, but everyone who had heard it. But if he succeeded, if they could broadcast the complete historical record to every inhabited world simultaneously, the truth would become unstoppable. Even the Council couldn't murder entire species once the evidence of their crimes was public knowledge. The journey to the galactic core would take 3 days through hyperspace. 3 days to prepare for what might be the most important mission in galactic history. 3 days to decide whether the price of truth was worth paying, no matter how high it climbed. Behind him, the young dragon's presence touched his mind one last time. "Whatever happens, Marcus Chen, know that your courage has already changed the galaxy forever. Some truths once spoken can never be unspoken." Marcus hoped Keeper was right, because in 3 days they would either save the galaxy's memory or die trying. The galactic core was a maelstrom of ancient stars and twisted spacetime, where gravity wells pulled at reality itself and made conventional navigation impossible. It was the perfect place to hide something you never wanted found. The Central Archive hung in the eye of that storm, protected not just by Council fleets, but by the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Marcus guided his stolen stealth ship through sensor nets that could detect a grain of sand at 1,000,000 kilometers. His modifications to the vessel were holding, dragon technology grafted onto Council engineering, creating something that existed in the blind spots between their detection methods. But he knew his luck wouldn't hold forever. "Archive Station Control, this is Supply Runner Delta 77 requesting approach clearance," he transmitted, using codes that Keeper had extracted from captured Council databases. "Delta 77, you are not on our scheduled manifest," came the suspicious reply. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs, but his voice remained steady. "Emergency resupply run. Admiral Chen Wu authorized priority delivery of quantum processing cores. The outer rim defensive grid is reporting cascade failures." The lie was perfect because it contained just enough truth to be believable. There really were defensive grid failures, caused by Dragon infiltration teams creating diversions across 3 sectors. The name Admiral Chen Wu carried weight because Marcus's uncle was indeed leading Earth's resistance to the isolation blockade. "Standby for verification." Those were the longest 30 seconds of Marcus's life. During the delay, he spotted the dragons approaching from the opposite vector, their ships barely visible even to his enhanced sensors. Keeper and its companions had disguised themselves as cosmic debris, drifting on solar winds while their living vessels remained dormant. "Delta 77, you are cleared for docking Bay 17. Proceed at minimum velocity and maintain constant communication." "Acknowledged." "Control." Marcus brought his ship into the Archive's docking bay, noting the massive defensive installations that studded every surface. This wasn't just a storage facility. It was a fortress designed to withstand siege by entire fleets. The Council had spared no expense protecting their stolen secrets. The docking process gave him his first close look at the Archive itself. It was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, with levels stretching deep into its core. Crystalline formations similar to those on the Dragon ship covered its inner surfaces, but these were dark and lifeless. The knowledge stored here was imprisoned rather than shared. As Marcus went through the routine of unloading fabricated supply containers, the dragons began their approach. They moved with infinite patience, drifting closer to the archives' outer barriers while the defensive sensors remained focused on more conventional threats. The plan called for Marcus to create a distraction at precisely 14:30 station time. He checked his chronometer. 14:27 in 3 minutes. He would either trigger the biggest revolution in galactic history or die in the attempt. At 14:29, he activated a virus that Keeper had designed specifically for Council computer systems. It was subtle at first, causing minor glitches in non-critical systems. Lights flickered, gravity generators hiccuped, and communication channels developed random static. At 14:30, the virus went active. Every display screen in the archive suddenly showed the same image, the young dragon emerging from its crystal shell, with Marcus standing protectively before it. The recording had been enhanced with memories that the dragon had shared, showing the moment from multiple perspectives and filling it with emotional resonance that made it impossible to ignore. Alarms began sounding immediately, but it was too late. The dragon struck the archive's barriers at the exact moment when the defensive systems were cycling through emergency protocols. Energy shields that had protected the facility for 3,000 years collapsed like soap bubbles. Marcus felt the station shake as the dragons breached the outer hull. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, but the ancient beings moved through solid matter as easily as they flew through space. Their target was the archive's core, where the complete galactic historical database waited in crystalline storage matrices. All security teams to Central Core echoed through the station's communication system. "We have hostile breach in progress. Initiate containment protocol," but Marcus was already moving. While the security forces rushed toward the core, he made his way to the station's primary communication array. His job was to ensure that whatever the dragons retrieved would be broadcast to every inhabited world simultaneously. The communication center was defended by automated systems that should have been impregnable. But Marcus had learned more than salvage techniques during his months with the dragons. He carried weapons that operated on principles human science, was only beginning to understand tools that could convince security systems they were looking at authorized personnel as he worked to override the transmission protocols. Marcus felt the station convulse around him. The dragons were fighting their way through defensive systems that included weapons capable of destroying small fleets. But they were also fighting something else, the accumulated weight of 3,000 years of lies. The crystals containing the historical data weren't just storage devices. They were prisons, designed to keep the truth contained even if someone managed to reach them. Breaking those seals would require more than technology. It would require the kind of moral authority that came from absolute conviction in the rightness of one's cause. Keeper's voice touched Marcus's mind across the chaos. "We have reached the core, but the seals are stronger than expected. The archives are fighting us. They were designed to resist recovery by force." "What do you need?" Marcus asked, his hands flying over the communication controls as security forces pounded on the locked door behind him. Truth freely given carries more power than truth taken by force. The archives will only open for someone who understands the full cost of revelation. Marcus understood. The system's designers had built in one final safeguard. The truth could only be released by someone willing to sacrifice everything for it, someone who understood that knowledge came with responsibility. "Do it," he said, knowing what Keeper was asking. "I accept the responsibility." The moment he spoke those words, Marcus felt something fundamental change inside him. The weight of galactic history settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. He could see the full scope of what the Council had hidden. Not just the purge of the dragons, but centuries of smaller atrocities. Cover-ups that had shaped the development of entire civilizations. But he could also see what the galaxy could become if the truth were restored. Species working together based on mutual understanding, rather than enforced ignorance. Technologies that could solve problems rather than create new ones. Art and philosophy that could elevate consciousness rather than suppress it. The crystalline seals shattered like glass, and 3,000 years of suppressed history flooded into the archive's communication systems. Marcus felt the raw data streaming through the arrays he had prepared, broadcasting simultaneously to every receiver in the galaxy. It was too much for any single mind to process, but the dragons had found a way to encode the information in ways that different species could understand. Humans received historical records that resonated with their cultural frameworks. Other species received the same information filtered through their own perceptual systems. But the core message was universal. The galaxy had been living a lie, and the truth was finally free. Security forces breached the communication center just as the final terabytes of data finished transmitting. Marcus raised his hands, knowing his part in this was over. The truth was spreading at light speed through subspace networks, reaching every inhabited world simultaneously. "You have no idea what you've done," the security commander said. His weapon trained on Marcus's chest. Marcus smiled, feeling strangely at peace despite the weapons pointed at him. "I know exactly what I've done. I've given the galaxy back its memory." Across the stars on 1,000 worlds, beings were learning their true history for the first time in 3 millennia. The revolution had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The truth was free, and it could never be caged again. In his last moments before the security forces led him away, Marcus thought of his daughter Sarah, somewhere in the Sol system that was still under Council blockade. But even that blockade couldn't stop subspace transmissions. She would know the truth too, and perhaps that knowledge would help her understand why her father had made the choices he did. The young dragon's voice touched his mind one final time. "The galaxy will remember Marcus Chen, the human who stood between death and the future. Your species has claimed its place among the stars." And in claiming that place, Marcus realized humanity had changed not just their own destiny, but the destiny of every thinking being in the galaxy. The age of lies was ending and the age of truth had begun. It was, he thought as the security forces led him away, a pretty good legacy for a simple salvage operator who had simply chosen to do the right thing when it mattered most.